The convict colony of Moreton Bay was established in September 1824 to house the worst of the convicts from Sydney. Originally at Redcliffe Point, where the first commissariat stores were established. The expedition consisted of Lieutenant Henry Miller, Alan Cunningham, John Oxley, and importantly Walter Scott, storekeeper and surgeon, together with their wives.
When Sir Thomas Brisbane decided to establish the convict colony in what was to become the state of Queensland, he chose a young surgeon and storekeeper because he had limited manpower potentially for the new colony. The storekeeper established his first commissariat store in a tent at Redcliffe Point in September 1824. When Sir Thomas Brisbane made the decision to establish a northern outpost north of Sydney, he appreciated very much indeed that this would be an isolated outpost and he needed skilled labourers. In Sydney, his only skilled labourers available, of course, were the convicts. And he called for volunteers, and the first party that came to establish what was to subsequently become the Moreton Bay settlement, later the city of Brisbane, and further the state of Queensland. When he chose those, he called for volunteers, and he had a convict overseer and 29 volunteer convicts, all of whom had skilled trades: masons, carpenters, and very importantly, shinglers and tree fellers.
They departed Sydney town on the brig Amity with 6 months of supplies and arrived at Redcliffe 11 days later. It's interesting that Pew's Almanac of 1850 credits John Oxley as the leader of the party, consisting of Oxley, taking with him a party of rank and file and 30 volunteers from the prisoners' barracks. Nevertheless, there is no doubt that Miller was the commandant in 1824.
The principal object in view in forming this establishment is to provide a place of security and subsistence for runaways from Port Macquarie. You are particularly enjoined to be as careful as possible of the supplies that accompany you, and to be as sparing as you can of their issue and expenditure. Sir Thomas Brisbane, August 1824.
The commissariat store was the crucial epicentre of all the early colonial outposts in Australia, and very much so in those that were convict settlements, because in the store was contained the axes, the rope, the tallow, crucially what food was available, particularly preserved foodstuffs, and of course very importantly arms and ammunition and explosives. In the convict environment, a secure repository for these was absolutely crucial, not only to the immediate safety, but indeed to the survival of those early colonial outposts.
Accordingly, the storekeeper Walter Scott commenced the construction of the more secure timber structure by the 28th of September of that year. Oxley and Cunningham had made an exploratory trip up the Brisbane River in September of 1824 to find a suitable location with a supply of fresh water. Until the mid-20th century, it was believed that the party landed looking for water near the present-day North Quay, and an obelisk was built in 1928 to commemorate the landing. In 1950, historian T.C. Truman made another analysis of Oxley's field book and concluded that the actual landing site was about 1 mile north on what is now called Milton Reach. In 1988, as part of the bicentennial celebrations, another monument was constructed at that site. So we now have 2 monuments and considerable argument.
By May 1825, the Bridgehead convict settlement at Redcliffe had run into enormous problems. The water supply had become fouled and the convicts were very sick. The Commandant, Henry Miller, made the executive decision to leave Redcliffe and re-establish the convict settlement on the north bank of the Brisbane River. When they arrived, the commissariat stores were absolutely crucial again for this second settlement in what was to become the state of Queensland. And the young commissariat officer, Walter Scott, established his initial tent and then his first store in what's today the central business district of Brisbane. There were 2 stores to be built there eventually, before Captain Logan, the Commandant, made the decision to establish a major and final store, the commissariat store that we know and are so proud today, on the north bank of the Brisbane River.
The area had been occupied for centuries by the Jagera and Turrbal Aboriginal people who didn't lightly accept their expulsion. Over a number of years, they made many attempts to destroy and burn crops planted by the settlers at what is now South Bank. This resulted in the deaths of many Aborigines shot by guards.
By 1827, the Commandant, Captain Logan, was faced with 2 major problems. Firstly, he had nowhere to store his explosives and ordnance. And secondly, the convicts that were here, by that stage all recidivists, that is secondary offenders, were outnumbering in manpower his military garrison by 8 to 1. For that reason, he desperately needed a secure and properly custom designed and built commissariat store. He sent dispatches to Sydney, and Dumeric produced plans for the commissariat store here. They, in a sense, were a job lot, because the commissariat stores at the other convict outposts in what was to become Australia are all built on a similar pattern. Several of those survive today, Maria Island, Norfolk Island and in Fremantle, and are similar but not as beautifully preserved as the commissariat store in Brisbane.
Logan, in 1826, had expressed the desire to build a jail in stone, if it can be procured, and now believed that a new magazine and commissariat store should be built in stone.
When Dumeric's plans arrived in Brisbane, Captain Logan realised that he had a quarry of the most perfect building stone that any commandant or engineer could wish. It was the outcrop of volcanic tuff in the Kangaroo Point cliffs, where a quarry was established and which stones subsequently provided the initial walls and fabric of the commissariat store.
The stone is welded volcanic tuff, or ignimbrite, now called Brisbane tuff, formed in the Triassic period about 226 million years ago, a time when the dinosaurs began emerging. Excavation of the foundation commenced on the 9th of July 1828, when the jail gang, consisting of 16 prisoners, was assigned to work on digging a drain at military barracks and making foundation for new stores.
Lieutenant Thomas Bainbrig was probably responsible for supervising the construction of the commissariat store. He was a career soldier, and it's unlikely he had any formal architectural training. But he was appointed as acting engineer at Moreton Bay and then became the superintendent of works. In this capacity, he would have supervised the construction of the windmill, the chaplain's house, the school and the commissariat store. The commissariat store was built by convicts. It was built by hardened criminals who had committed crimes in New South Wales and were sent to work on the jail gang. They were known as the most despicable type of men. They had to work on the foundations, and they had to dig away at the William Street rock with picks and shovels and then move tons of schist. It took 4 months and it was hard, back-breaking work. But it was meant to be, because it was a punishment to try and reform these men. It would seem that it didn't really work though, because one day John Brunga killed William Purfoot with his pick while working on the jail gang.
Let's have it, will ya? No trouble, mind.
No, you be young and fit.
You can have yours.
The stonemasons who worked the Tuff, which was the fabric of the commissariat store, were themselves all skilled. They worked under a master stonemason, Edward Lee, whom we know was 50 years of age when he led this group of 6 skilled masons who worked this very durable and very hard stone. They selected special colours for the front of the commissariat store, that is, the front facing the river, where the ships landed, where the stores were brought up from what was then called King's Jetty, later Queen's Wharf, into the commissariat store, often under armed guard. Brisbane Tuff is a very hard stone, and it's very hard to be worked even by skilled masons. For this reason, the lintels, the door surrounds and the window sills of the store were made from sandstone. That was quarried probably from the Breakfast Creek sandstone, or possibly from Goodna, but it's easily worked and can be shaped in the curves and angles that are needed for lintels, door surrounds and window frames.
Meanwhile, Brisbane town was growing apace, with a jail, barracks, the windmill, a female factory, or women's prison, chaplains' quarters, and a hospital.
The penal settlement was short-lived. By the 1830s, the British government no longer favoured transportation. It was inefficient, it didn't reform the convicts, and most of all, it was very expensive. When Governor Burt became governor in 1831, he was instructed to close the penal settlement. This took some time as they had to relocate all the convicts, and by 1839, there were 94 convicts still here. In February 1842, Governor Gipps declared the Moreton Bay penal settlement closed and Brisbane was open for free settlement.
At this time, the commissariat store had a name change to the Colonial Store. From 1842 to 1846, the building was also used as a bond store and an army garrison store. Over the period until 1898, the building was used for various purposes, including land sales, immigrant accommodation, and a colonial store. In 1898, it became the government store, and a third floor was added in 1913.
The commissariat store was allocated to the Royal Historical Society in 1976 when we were leaving Newstead House. The Department of Public Works needed to do a lot of work on the building to make it appropriate. That work involved doing a concrete staircase, huge pillars on the ground floor. They put salt in mortar, and conservation architects and historians were concerned. The Society began advocacy to overcome this, and it took many years. As the Borough Charter was introduced, that helped. In 1998, a conservation report was done by historian Margaret Cook and an architect Michael Kennedy, and in 1997 we obtained a Centenary of Federation Fund grant, $1 million, from the Commonwealth Government, and the conservation report guided the work we did. The state government input another $1 million, and what we were able to do was to put in a custom-built lift, a new galvanised iron roof, conservation of the building, and to have new mortar pointed between the tuff stones. and have barrett straps support the middle floor. It was a great success, and it was opened in April 2001. The Society, the Department of Public Works, Commonwealth Government, heritage architects and historians were all very pleased, and the Society operates in the building very successfully with a convict museum.
The Commissariat store is being our second oldest building in Queensland and one of two remaining. It was registered on the Queensland Heritage listing in 1992. We've actually been in place here at the Royal Historical Society since 1981. This is our home. Now, this store in particular is very lucky to still be here. If they had not decided that State Stores in 1913 to extend the roof above and to add an additional floor, I dare say this building probably would have been demolished along with all the others. There are only two structures left from the convict era from 1825 to 1842 in Brisbane, and they are this building, completed in 1829, and the windmill up on Wickham Terrace, completed in 1828. Small bits and pieces of the other buildings still remain under the ground, and every now and again they surface, particularly in the case of the female factory at Eagle Farm, where we uncovered a whole series of foundations just last year. We hope to continue that work. So most of the buildings which were built by the convicts are now gone. Many were replaced in 1880. For instance, the Supreme Court building took the place of the old convict hospital. The female factory disappeared in place of now the General Post Office, and various other buildings disappeared under the ground, including the prisoner barracks in Queen Street, which were demolished in December 1880, and some of the buildings built after that. The facades are still in place. So we're very lucky to have just two structures left from the convict era, and we hope that they will be maintained as they should be and preserved for future generations.